It was a Thursday. I was sitting in my apartment, the quiet kind of silence you earn after a long day, finishing up a freelance data project, just me and the low hum of my laptop. Then my phone buzzed. A secure message. The sender was listed as Colonel Miller, my old CO from Kabul. My heart did a thing. It sort of seized. I hadn't heard from him in almost a year. The message was 3 words. 3 words that changed everything. Go dark. Review. Before I could even begin to process what that meant, what kind of review, the sound started. A banging on my front door. Not a knock. A frantic, angry pounding. I opened it, and they were there. My uncle Rahim, my cousin Zain. They didn't wait for an invitation. They just pushed past me into my apartment. Their faces were wrong. It was this mask of fury, but the eyes were cold, focused. My uncle started. His voice was a roar that seemed to shake the cheap drywall. He said I'd betrayed them, betrayed the family, betrayed the country. Then Zain stepped forward, his own voice shrill, high-pitched. He held his phone out, his finger jabbing at the screen as he shouted. She sold data to the Taliban. She put us all at risk. The accusation was so specific, so utterly insane. He was waving his phone around, talking about data logs and servers. For a second, just a second, I couldn't breathe. My entire world just stopped. The accusation was treason. It came from my own blood. And let me ask you, what's the most shocking lie anyone has ever told about you? And how did you react in that first moment? Let me know in the comments. Because I just froze. But only for a second. Then the shock evaporated, and it was replaced by something else. An icy, methodical calm, because I was watching a performance. And that's when it clicked, that conversation from 2 months ago. It wasn't just a memory, it was evidence. Zain, over a family dinner, asking all these weirdly specific questions. So what kind of firewalls did NATO use? And how secure are those old credentials really? He'd passed it off as professional curiosity for his new security consulting business. At the time, I thought he was just trying to sound impressive. No, it wasn't curiosity. It was reconnaissance. I looked from his face to my uncle's. They were delivering their lines with so much passion, so much conviction, but their anger didn't track. It didn't feel real. It felt constructed. They didn't sound angry. They sounded rehearsed. And that was the real discovery of that moment. Not the lie itself, but the structure of the lie. This wasn't a spontaneous, emotional outburst. This was a planned, coordinated attack. This was an indictment. And you don't bring an indictment unless you think you have proof. The specificity of the charge, selling data, that wasn't an accident. It meant they had something. A document, a file, a doctored log. They had a weapon. And they had just told me, with perfect clarity, that it was aimed directly at my head. The door closed. And in the silence, the sound of my own breathing was suddenly very loud. My uncle's words were still hanging in the air, a toxic cloud of accusation. My cousin's face, contorted in that fake righteous anger. It was burned into my mind. Treason. They accused me of treason. The emotional part of my brain, the part that should have been screaming or crying or shattering things, it just went quiet. It was a mercy, I think, a system override. Because the other part of my brain, the analyst, the part I trusted, the part that got me through Kabul, it came online. Cold, clear, and ready to work. I didn't call anyone. I didn't panic. I walked to my desk, and I began my protocol. The first step is always the same when you suspect a breach. You sever the connection. I physically unplugged the Ethernet cable from my router. My apartment was now a digital island. Step 2, forensics. I took a new, sealed hard drive from my desk drawer and began the process of creating a forensic image of my laptop's current drive. A perfect bit-for-bit copy. Anything they did, any trace they left, I was preserving it in digital amber. Only then did I begin the lockdown. I went through every single account I owned. Primary email, secondary email, banking, utilities, cloud storage, the stupid social media accounts I never used. Every single one. New password. Generated. 24 characters. Uppercase, lowercase, numbers, symbols. Then, I went deeper, enabling hardware key two-factor authentication for everything that supported it. From that moment on, no one could get into my accounts without a physical key that I, and only I, possessed. It was methodical. It was meticulous. And with every password I changed, with every security layer I added, I could feel the last traces of shock burning away, leaving behind something clean and hard as steel. They thought they were lighting a fire to burn me down. They had no idea. They thought they were lighting a fire. They were actually just turning on my machine. And maybe that's a strange reaction. Maybe most people would fall apart. Have you ever had that moment? That moment where your brain just switches into pure problem-solving mode to survive a crisis? I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments, because for me, it was the only way. While I worked, a thought surfaced. A piece of data that suddenly had a new, terrifying context. A phone call from a month ago. It was my Aunt Sadia, my uncle's wife. She was so sweet, so cheerful. She was calling, she said, because her community group was collecting old electronics for a charity drive. And she remembered I had an old work laptop, the one I used in Kabul, just sitting in a closet. She asked if she could have it. I'd told her yes, of course. I'd explained that the drive had been professionally wiped, that it was completely clean. She said that was perfect. I'd given it to her the next weekend. A useless piece of hardware, I thought. But it wasn't. The drive was wiped, yes. But the network card inside, it has a unique identifier, a MAC address, a digital fingerprint. In the right hands, it could be used to spoof my identity on a network. They didn't just have a theory. They had the hardware. They had the weapon I'd used to serve my country. And they were repurposing it to frame me as a traitor. The lockdown took 3 hours. When it was done, I moved to the next phase, the audit. I started with my primary email account security logs, and there it was, dated 3 weeks ago, a password recovery attempt. It had failed because it couldn't answer the security questions, but the attempt itself was logged. The time, the date, and the IP address it came from. An IP address I had never seen before. It was the first concrete thread. They had left a footprint, and I was going to follow it all the way back to them. I ran a reverse lookup on the IP address. It wasn't a residential address, which is harder to trace. This was a commercial IP block. It was registered to a shared workspace provider downtown, a trendy building with glass walls and kombucha on tap. I pulled up their public directory of tenants. And I scrolled down the list of boutique marketing firms and tech startups. And then I saw it. Kyber Solutions. My cousin Zane's company. My breath caught in my chest. It was a direct link. Undeniable. He hadn't even bothered to use a VPN to hide his location. He was either arrogant or stupid, or both. I dug deeper. Using my own server logs, I cross-referenced that IP address. And I found it again. And again. And again. Dozens of repeated pings against my personal cloud server over the last 2 weeks. Brute force attacks. Automated scripts trying thousands of password combinations. But they weren't random. That's what made my blood run cold. The password lists they were using. It was my life. Weaponized. The name of my first pet. My mother's maiden name. My high school mascot. The street I grew up on. Anniversaries, birthdays, old nicknames. Information only an intimate family member could know. Every failed login attempt was another whisper of their betrayal. This wasn't a stranger. This was a conspiracy that sat at my own dinner table. The sheer pathetic banality of it all was what struck me the most. He was trying to ruin my life, to label me an enemy of the state, using the digital equivalent of looking under the welcome mat for a key. He used our childhood dog's name to try and frame me for treason. It's amazing what you can catch when people get lazy, when they think they're smarter than everyone else. Drop a comment if you've ever caught someone out. because they were just plain sloppy with their lies. What was their mistake? Because Zane's was arrogance. He was so sure of himself, and as I sat there, looking at the log of his pathetic attempts, another piece of the puzzle slid into place. A memory of my Uncle Rahim, boasting at a family dinner just after Zane had launched his company. He'd been so proud. He'd clapped Zane on the back and announced to the whole table, "I gave him the seed money to get the best office, the best equipment. Nothing but the best for my boy." He hadn't just known. He hadn't just approved. He had financed the operation. The computer Zane used to attack me, my uncle's money likely paid for it. The office with the IP address that was now a glowing red flag in my investigation, paid for by my uncle. This was a family enterprise, but the brute force attacks had all failed. I had secured my main accounts years ago. They couldn't get in. So what was the proof Zane was so confident about? I had to assume they had something. I started going through my older, less secure accounts, and then I found it. An old, forgotten photo-sharing site I hadn't logged into since college. Its security was a joke, and in its access logs, I found it. One successful login. From the same IP address as Zane's office. Dated last Tuesday, 2:15 p.m. I looked at the account's contents, and there, sitting amongst a handful of grainy photos from a decade ago, was a new file. A single, tiny, encrypted zip file. It was less than a kilobyte. It was probably full of garbage, but that didn't matter. The file itself wasn't the point. The timestamp was the record of a successful upload from one of my accounts to an external server. It was a forgery, a digital lie. They had created a single, perfect breadcrumb for investigators to find. A piece of seemingly irrefutable evidence that I had sent an encrypted file. They had planted the seed. They had built their case on a foundation of lies and sloppy cyber work, and I had just unearthed their entire blueprint. The crime scene was no longer my life. It was my laptop, and it had given me everything I needed. The who, the where, the how. Now, I just needed to find out why. I had the how. They had logged into a forgotten account and planted a single poisoned file. A neat little piece of fabricated evidence, but it wasn't enough. To dismantle them, I needed the why. Why risk framing a family member for treason? A crime that serious. It's not a diversion. It's a nuclear option. You only press that button when you're trying to hide something even bigger. My defense was complete. Now, my prosecution began. I turned my full attention to my cousin Zane's company, Kyber Solutions. The entire investigation pivoted from my own hard drives to his digital life. I started with open source intelligence, OSINT. Everything he and his company had put out into the public domain. His website was the first stop. It was slick, all black and gray, with sharp fonts and stock photos of men in suits looking at transparent screens. The text was a masterpiece of corporate jargon. Synergistic risk mitigation, proactive intelligence frameworks, strategic geopolitical advisement. It was all designed to sound incredibly important while saying absolutely nothing. But a website is just a story. I needed facts. I started digging into the databases, federal contracts, state contracts, local municipal bids. I searched for Kyber Solutions. The result was always the same. 0. Not a single government contract. Not one. I checked for client testimonials, case studies, press releases. Nothing. It was a ghost company. It had a nice website and an expensive office, but it had no apparent business. No income. I checked his business license filings. Expired. His insurance bonds. Lapsed. The address listed on his corporate registration wasn't his fancy downtown office. It was a P.O. box at a mail forwarding service in Delaware. A classic shell corporation setup. The entire enterprise was a lie. A beautifully designed, expertly marketed lie. And the scale of it. It was breathtaking. My cousin wasn't just a struggling CEO. He was a professional fraud. He built a house of cards, and he's trying to burn down my entire life to create a diversion. And that's when another piece of evidence clicked into place. A memory from 6 months prior. Zain had shown up to a family dinner wearing this ridiculously expensive watch. A pilot's watch. The kind that costs more than a car. He'd bragged that it was a signing bonus from a major new client. I'd asked him which one, just making conversation, and my Uncle Rahim had cut me off, his voice sharp. Zain doesn't discuss his clients, Anya. It's a matter of national security. He'd use that phrase, national security, to shut down a simple question. It wasn't a reason. It was a shield. A way to stop anyone from looking too closely at the man behind the curtain. It's amazing what people will hide behind, isn't it? Have you ever gotten a bad feeling about someone's amazing new business? What were the red flags that you saw? I want to know. Because for me, the red flags weren't just there, they were on fire. I kept digging. If he had no legitimate clients, he was either a front for something, or he was failing spectacularly. I started running searches on his company name, paired with terms like fraud, investigation, lawsuit, and then I got a hit. It wasn't a lawsuit against him. It was something far, far worse. A local news article, dated 6 months ago. The headline was about a major defense logistics contractor, a company called Atlas Logistics. They were under federal investigation by the Department of Justice for massive, systemic fraud, overbilling the government for hundreds of millions of dollars on their contracts in Afghanistan. It was a huge scandal. I read through the article, my eyes scanning the details of their crimes. And then, at the very bottom, buried in a long paragraph listing their known associates and partners, I saw it. A list of local subcontractors who had worked with them. And on that list was Kyber Solutions, Atlas Logistics. The name hit me like a physical blow. They were notoriously corrupt. Everyone who worked in theater knew about them. They were the ones who billed the government for $50 screws and phantom shipments of supplies that never arrived. If Zain was their subcontractor, he wasn't providing strategic geopolitical advisement. He was a ghost on their payroll. He was a pass-through. He was a money launderer. That was the why. The real crime he was trying to hide. I had the theory. I needed the proof. I needed the money trail. My first stop was another ethically gray area. I remembered that years ago, to save money, my aunt had put me on the shared family mobile plan. They had never taken me off. I was still listed as an authorized user. I logged into the account. I pulled up the detailed billing statements for Zain's line for the past 6 months. And I started cross-referencing the numbers he called against a list of the key players in the Atlas Logistics indictment. Bingo. Dozens of calls. Sometimes multiple times a day. To a number belonging to a former Atlas Logistics executive. A man who had been indicted just 3 weeks ago. Zain wasn't just a subcontractor, he was in direct, frequent contact with one of the primary criminals. But the calls weren't enough. I needed the bank records. I needed to see the money move from Atlas to Zain, to my family. And that's where I hesitated. This next step. It was a line. A serious one. But they had accused me of treason. They had tried to destroy my life, my career, my freedom. I thought about that. I thought about what they were willing to do to me, to protect their son. This is probably a gray area, legally and ethically, but they accused me of treason. Was I wrong to go into that account? Tell me honestly in the comments, because I decided right then that there were no more lines. They had already burned them all down. I remembered years ago, helping my Aunt Sadia set up her online portal for the family's wealth management account. She was a meticulous bookkeeper, a fact she never let me forget. I remembered her handing me a spreadsheet she'd made, tracking every dollar I still owed for my student loans. "We keep clean books in this family, Anya," she'd said, as if my debt was a moral failing and her tracking of it was a virtue. I remembered her sighing about how they had to tighten their belts to support Zain's dream, making me feel guilty for my own stability. The hypocrisy was an open wound. I went to the login page for the wealth portal. I clicked, forgot password. The security question popped up. Name of your first pet. I typed in F-I-F-I, and I was in. My heart was hammering in my chest, but it wasn't fear. It was the pure, uncut adrenaline of the hunt. The same lazy personal information Zane had used to try and hack me, his mother had used to secure their entire family fortune. They accused me of selling secrets, but their entire financial life was secured by a poodle named Fifi. I opened the documents folder, and there they were, the bank statements for the family trust, going back 2 years. I opened the first one, and I saw it. A series of large monthly wire transfers from the Al Hassan Family Trust directly to the corporate account for Kyber Solutions. $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. The amounts grew over time. I did a quick calculation. The total was nearly $500,000. They hadn't just given him seed money, they were propping up his entire fraudulent enterprise. But that wasn't the smoking gun. The smoking gun was the last transfer, the largest one, $100,000 sent just 4 weeks ago, right after the Atlas Logistics executive had been indicted. I looked at the memo line for the wire transfer. It was 2 words and 2 letters. Final capital investment, Al contingency. Al, Atlas Logistics. It wasn't an investment. It was a contingency fund, a slush fund. It was the money they were putting aside to pay for lawyers, to manage the fallout, to handle the financial damage of their son being implicated in a massive federal corruption scandal. I finally had it. The motive, the means, the money, the whole rotten conspiracy laid bare in the sterile columns of a bank statement. This wasn't just about protecting their son from failure anymore. This was about protecting him from prison. The memo line was a gunshot in a quiet library. Al contingency. Atlas Logistics. It wasn't just a slush fund to protect Zane from a failed business. It was a war chest, a reserve set aside to manage the fallout from a federal criminal investigation. My uncle wasn't just a supportive father, he was a conspirator. But the wire transfers, they were authorized by 2 people, my uncle and my Aunt Sadia. And my focus shifted to her, the quiet one, the one who always sighed about family burdens, who played the martyr, who was the moral bookkeeper of the family. The betrayal from my uncle was loud and hot, like a fire. This felt different, colder, deeper. I started digging into the trust's activity logs, going back further. And I found it. The day after the first news article about the Atlas Logistics indictment was published, my Aunt Sadia had logged into the portal, and she had liquidated a massive stock portfolio. Stocks I had helped her research years ago, when she'd asked for my advice on long-term, stable investments. She had sold every single share, and the funds from that sale were what fed the AL contingency. This wasn't a mother blindly giving her son money. This was an active, strategic financial move, executed with precision in direct response to a threat. She saw the iceberg coming, and instead of turning the ship, she started loading the lifeboats with cash for her favorite passenger. She wasn't just the enabler. She was the acting CFO of this entire conspiracy, and that's when I remembered her standing in her kitchen, handing me a spreadsheet she'd printed out. It was a detailed amortization table for my student loans. Every payment I'd made, every dollar of interest accrued. "We keep clean books in this family, Anya," she'd said, her voice gentle, as if she were doing me a favor by reminding me of my burden. The staggering, breathtaking hypocrisy of it all left me breathless. She tracked my every penny while she funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into a criminal cover-up. My uncle was the voice of the conspiracy, but my aunt was its banker. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who's worse, the person who shouts the lie in your face, who performs the outrage for all to see, or the person who silently, meticulously, writes the checks to fund that lie, who quietly moves the money to make it all possible? I really want to know what you think. Who's the bigger betrayer? The portal had a messaging feature, an internal email system for communicating with their wealth manager. I clicked on the sent folder. I didn't expect to find anything. It was a long shot, but there it was. an email chain between her and my uncle from 5 weeks ago. The subject line was simply, "The situation." My uncle's message was short, panicked. "Is it handled?" Her reply, sent an hour later, was calm, measured, and it was the single most damning piece of evidence I had found yet. "The funds are moved," she wrote. "He will have what he needs to manage this. Now we just need to make sure the attention is somewhere else when the time comes." Zane's idea about Anya is ugly, but it might be the only way to protect our son. It might be the only way to protect our son. There it was. Not just complicity, not just knowledge, but active participation in the plot to frame me, written, saved, and time-stamped. It was a confession, signed in sterile digital ink. I finally had the complete picture of their motive, the why. Now I could assemble the full theory of the crime. I started mapping it out, like I would for an intelligence brief. 1. My cousin Zane, desperate to look like a big shot, gets involved with a corrupt Atlas Logistics. He's not a real subcontractor. He's a shell company, a mechanism for them to launder money. 2. The Department of Justice launches its investigation and Atlas goes down. Zane is now terminally exposed. His name is on their books. He knows it's only a matter of time before they come for him. 3. He panics. He needs a get-out-of-jail-free card, an ace to play. He theorizes that if he can get his hands on actual high-value NATO intelligence, he can use it as leverage. Maybe trade it to the investigators for immunity, or sell it to someone else to fund his escape. 4. To do that, he needs my credentials, my name, my access. So he tries to hack me. He fails. But in the process, he gets into a low-security account, just enough to plant a single fabricated file. 5. The family, my aunt, my uncle. They approve the final desperate phase of the plan. They launch a coordinated, pre-rehearsed character assassination, accusing me of the very crime he had been trying to commit. It was projection, elevated to the level of grand strategy. They weren't just creating a diversion, they were creating an alternate suspect. One with a background in data analysis and a history in Afghanistan. The perfect scapegoat. The accusation was never about what I did. It was a confession of what he failed to do. It's a classic tactic, isn't it? The liar who accuses everyone else of lying. The thief who is paranoid about being stolen from. Have you ever seen someone accuse you of something they were 100% guilty of themselves? It happens all the time. Share your story in the comments. Because this was a textbook case, and the memory that surfaced then, it was so old, so trivial. I hadn't thought of it in years. Zane in high school. He was caught red-handed cheating on a history final. The teacher found the notes tucked under his exam paper. When his parents, my uncle and aunt, confronted him, his immediate defense wasn't denial. It was to point the finger at me. He claimed that I, the straight-A student, the responsible one, had been pressuring him, that I'd given him the notes and told him he had to use them. He tried to frame me as the bad influence. The pattern of behavior. It had been there all along. For his entire life, whenever he was caught, his first instinct was to make me the source of the crime. And then I remembered the very beginning of all this. My cousin, standing in my apartment, jabbing his finger at his phone. The supposed proof. At the time, I was so focused on the accusation itself, I hadn't paid close attention to the details. But I have an almost perfect memory for things I see, even under duress. I closed my eyes and pictured it. The screenshot he was showing off, the data log. And in my mind's eye, I enhanced the image. I looked closer, and I saw it. Faint, but unmistakable. In the top corner of the image, where the Windows directory path would be, it wasn't a path to a NATO server. It wasn't a path to a cloud account. The file path began with the letter C. C:\users\Zane\desktop. The proof he was brandishing to my uncle, the evidence of my treason, was a screenshot he had taken on his own computer. It was the sloppiest, most arrogant mistake he could have possibly made. And I had it. I had everything. The motive, the means, the money trail, the confession from my aunt, and now, proof that the primary evidence was a fabrication created on the accuser's own machine. The case was complete. It was airtight. And it was absolutely worthless if it stayed on my laptop. I had to do something. I had to give it to someone who would understand the stakes. Not the local police. This involved military contractors, federal investigations, international jurisdictions. This was out of their league. There was only one person I could trust: Colonel Miller. I opened the secure messaging app. My hands were shaking, but my mind was calm. This was the point of no return. I drafted the message. I didn't fill it with emotion. I didn't talk about betrayal or my family. I wrote it like an official intelligence report. Cold. Factual. Precise. Colonel, I wrote. Further to your warning, I believe the security review initiated against me is a diversionary tactic related to the Atlas Logistics investigation. My cousin, Zain al-Hassan, CEO of Kyber Solutions, a listed AL subcontractor, has orchestrated a campaign to frame me. Evidence suggests he attempted to compromise my credentials to access intel, potentially as leverage with DOJ investigators. His parents, Rahim and Sadia al-Hassan, financed his operation and were complicit in the plan to frame me. I have attached a full dossier with a timeline, IP logs, financial records, communications, and forensic analysis of their fabricated evidence. My finger hovered over the send button. This was it. The moment I officially declared war on my own family. The moment I handed them over to the authorities. This was the scariest message I've ever sent. And I have to ask you, would you have had the guts to hit send? Be honest. As I sat there, about to detonate my own life, I remembered the last thing Colonel Miller ever said to me at my final debriefing in Kabul. He'd looked over my last report and nodded. Your strength isn't just finding the data, Anya, he'd said. It's that you present the truth without agenda or emotion. Don't ever lose that. I was holding on to that now. Facts first, always. I just handed my family to the wolves. But then I realized they were the ones who threw me in the cage first. I hit send. The minutes that followed were the longest of my life. I just sat there, staring at the screen. What if he didn't believe me? What if he thought I was a hysteric? What if this just made me look even more guilty? Then, less than 10 minutes later, the screen lit up with a reply. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the message. It wasn't long, but it changed everything. We are aware of Kyber Solutions, Miller wrote. Your intelligence corroborates an ongoing counter-intel operation. We have a source. Stand by. I will handle this. Do not engage your family. I read it again. And, again, corroborates an ongoing counter-intel operation. They were already watching him. They already knew. I hadn't just been a lone analyst investigating my own frame-up. I had, without knowing it, been gathering evidence that was the missing piece of an active military intelligence operation. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a witness, and I wasn't alone. Colonel Miller's message was an order: stand by. To a soldier, that means hold your position, await further instructions. To an analyst, it means the situation is active and new data is pending. I chose to interpret it as both. I would hold my position in the quiet of my apartment, and I would prepare for the moment the data stream turned into a tidal wave. I didn't stay idle. I couldn't. My mind was running too hot. I took all the evidence I had uncovered, the IP logs, the financial records, the emails, the screenshot of Zane's desktop, and I started to build. I worked with a cold, furious energy I hadn't felt since my last tour. I wasn't just compiling files. I was forging a weapon. I created a master document. I called it simply the Al-Hassan dossier. I structured it like a formal intelligence report, the kind I used to write for NATO command. It was clean, sterile, and absolutely brutal in its objectivity. Section 1. The accusation. It detailed the initial confrontation, the specific language used, and included the enhanced screenshot of Zane's desktop, with the file path proving the evidence was created on his own computer. Section 2. Digital forensics. A complete timeline of the cyber attack. The IP addresses from Zane's office. The logs of the brute force password attempts. The technical specifications and unique MAC address of the old laptop my aunt had taken from me. Section 3. Financial forensics. This was the longest section. Every wire transfer from my aunt and uncle's trust to Kyber Solutions. The documents showing the liquidated stock portfolio. And the final, damning transfer with the memo line, Al contingency. Section 4. The conspiracy. This section laid out the motive. It connected Zane's shell company to the Atlas Logistics corruption scandal. It included the phone records of his calls to the indicted executive. And, as the final exhibit in this section, it included the full text of the email between my aunt and uncle, where they agreed that framing me was an ugly but necessary step to protect their son. There's something incredibly powerful about seeing all the evidence in black and white, taking a chaotic, painful betrayal and organizing it into a neat, undeniable narrative of fact. If you could build a dossier on someone from your past, a case file of truth, what would the title of the first chapter be? Let me know. I printed 3 copies. I bound them in simple black report covers. As the printer hummed, churning out page after page of their crimes, a memory surfaced. My Uncle Rahim, years ago, I'd built a presentation for him for a community board meeting, full of charts and data. He had been so proud. He'd put his arm around me and said, "You leave no stone unturned, Anya. It's your superpower." I was now using the very skill he'd praised to systematically dismantle his entire life. Every page that came out of the printer felt like a stone being laid on a grave, the grave of the family I thought I had. There was no grief left, just the grim, methodical finality of an undertaker preparing a body for burial. I wasn't just building a case. I was writing their obituary. As I was organizing the final files, I went back to the one place they'd successfully breached, that old, forgotten photo-sharing site. On a hunch, I ran a file recovery program on the account's cache. And I found something. A single, deleted audio file. Tiny. Barely 10 seconds long. My heart hammered. I clicked play. And I heard his voice. My cousin, Zane. He sounded like he was in a car, the audio slightly muffled. He was practicing. "She sold the data," he said, his voice trying for a tone of shocked discovery. "She's always been reckless. She put us all at risk." It was a rehearsal. He had practiced his lines, the exact words he would later shout in my apartment, before he ever came to my door. The spontaneous, righteous rage was a complete fabrication, and I now had the audio to prove it. Days passed in absolute silence. I followed Miller's orders. I stood by. Then, the official notification arrived. A summons, delivered by a courier. I was to appear at a closed military tribunal at a nearby base in 2 days' time. It was to answer a formal complaint regarding a potential security breach. The complaint, the document stated, had been filed by Mr. Rahim al-Hassan. My uncle had done it. He had taken the lie and made it official. He had triggered the confrontation he thought he would win. The night before the tribunal, I couldn't sleep. I was going over my dossier again and again, checking every fact. Then, another secure message from Colonel Miller lit up my phone. There was no text, just a single attached audio file. I put in my earbuds. I pressed play. I heard Zane's voice first. It was different, not the rehearsed anger. This was a nervous, bragging, desperate voice. "I have access to everything," he was saying to another man. "The NATO servers, all of it. My cousin, she was a legend. But she's careless. I can get you anything you need. Logistics schedules, patrol routes. Just tell me what it's worth to you." Then, the other man spoke. His voice was calm, professional, devoid of emotion. "That's a big claim. Can you prove it?" My blood ran cold. The other man. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't some black market data broker. He was an operator, a professional. He was one of ours. And he was baiting a trap. They weren't just watching Zain. They were running a sting operation on him. He was trying to sell intel he didn't have to an undercover agent he didn't see coming. My cousin thought he was setting a trap for me, but he had been walking in a cage the entire time. It's an incredible plot twist, isn't it? That feeling when you find out you had a powerful ally working in the shadows for you the whole time. Has that ever happened to you? Tell me about it. As I listened, Miller's last words to me in Kabul echoed in my mind. The truth has a way of finding the light, Anya, he had said, shaking my hand. Just make sure you're the one holding the lamp. I finally understood. It wasn't just advice, it was an instruction. He was telling me even then that my ability to uncover and present the factual truth was my real weapon. And my dossier, it was the lamp I had just built. A second message from Miller came through as the audio file ended. The man your cousin is speaking to is one of my assets, he wrote, and a recording was made 2 weeks ago. This is a decrypted briefing tape from our counter-intel operation targeting Atlas Logistics' attempts to bribe their way out of trouble. Your cousin was their errand boy. We'll see you tomorrow. The file wasn't just a random recording. It was official evidence, a decrypted briefing tape. It was an unimpeachable weapon of annihilation, handed to me by NATO counterintelligence on the eve of the battle. The game had changed. I wasn't going into that tribunal as a defendant, armed with a dossier of evidence I'd scraped together myself. I was going in as the prosecution's star witness, and I was bringing a cannon to a knife fight. The tribunal room was sterile. Polished wood, neutral gray walls, and the oppressive, humming silence of military justice. 3 high-ranking officers sat at a long table, their faces impassive. They were the arbiters of my fate. In the small gallery behind me, I could feel the presence of my Aunt Sadia, poised to play the part of the distraught matriarch. My uncle, Rahim, was called to speak first. He stood, and he was magnificent. It was a performance worthy of a stage. He spoke of honor, of family, of the pride he had in his country. He painted a picture of me as a brilliant but troubled young woman, someone who went to a war zone and became enamored with the danger, someone who lost her moral compass. He talked about his sleepless nights, his profound disappointment, his broken heart at having to bring this complaint forward. It was a masterclass in manipulative charisma. I saw in him, in that moment, the man I remembered giving a booming, captivating toast at a family wedding years ago. He'd always known how to command a room, how to sell a story. And the story he was selling now was my ruin. Then, it was Zain's turn. He played his part perfectly. The heartbroken cousin, the reluctant hero who had discovered my betrayal and had to sound the alarm to protect his family, to protect his nation. He spoke with a tremor in his voice. He had tears in his eyes. He presented their proof, the fabricated data log, as if it were a sacred artifact of my treachery. He looked at me with such pity, such sorrow. It was breathtaking. And through it all, I sat there, silent, still. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a strange, profound calm. It was like watching a movie where you've already read the book. You know exactly how it ends. They were building this elaborate stage, constructing this tragedy piece by piece, all for an audience of 3 men at a table. I watched them read my eulogy, not realizing it was their own. It's a critical moment, isn't it? When a liar is in full flight, right in front of you. What's the best way to face them? A huge, emotional confrontation that matches their energy? Or ice-cold silence that lets them hang themselves? Vote in the comments. I chose silence. Zain, emboldened by my lack of reaction, made his final, critical error. The presiding officer asked him how he could be certain about the data, and Zain, trying to add a layer of credibility, said, I saw her transfer the data myself, on her old work computer, the one she used in Kabul, and that was it. The first, fatal slip. Because my dossier proved that the hard drive from that specific laptop had been professionally wiped and destroyed months before the date of the fabricated evidence he was pointing to. He hadn't just lied. He had just committed perjury in a federal military tribunal. The presiding officer turned to me. His voice was flat. "Ms. Al-Hassan, your response?" I didn't stand up. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the 3 black binders. The dossiers. I placed them on the table in front of me with a soft, definitive thud. The sound was small, but it seemed to echo in the silent room. "My response is in this report," I said. My voice was low, even. I pushed the first copy across the polished table to the 3 officers. I slid the second one to the military lawyer assigned to the proceedings, and I pushed the third one towards my uncle and my cousin. Zane stared at it like it was a venomous snake. "You'll find my uncle's testimony summarized on page 1, I began, my voice never rising. "My cousin's version of events is on page 3, along with an enhanced image of the screenshot he just referenced, which clearly shows the file path originating from his own desktop computer." I paused. Section 2 is the full digital forensic analysis. It contains the IP logs from my cousin's downtown office, a complete record of his failed brute force attacks, and the technical specifications of the Kabul laptop he just mentioned, along with the certificate of destruction for its original hard drive, dated 3 months prior to the alleged data transfer. That feeling when you slide the receipts across the table, when you know you have the facts on your side. "Tell me about a time you came prepared with proof." Appendix A, I continued, is the financial forensic report. You will see the wire transfers from the Al-Hassan Family Trust to Kyber Solutions, totaling nearly $500,000. Appendix B contains the phone records documenting dozens of calls between my cousin and the recently indicted former executive of Atlas Logistics. And Appendix C is an email from my aunt, Sadia Al-Hassan, to my uncle, confirming their plan to use me as a diversion to protect their son from the Atlas investigation. As I said my aunt's name, I glanced back at the gallery. The color had drained from her face. Her mask of the grieving mother had shattered. She was looking at me with pure, undiluted horror. The silent chairman of the board, the secret banker, had just been seen. Her meticulous, clean books had been opened for the world to read. I remembered being a little girl, meticulously organizing my schoolwork into 3-ring binders with colored tabs, just like these dossiers. My family used to call it obsessive. But that same methodical nature, the need to have every fact in its proper place, it was about to be my salvation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The data was screaming. My uncle jumped to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is slander, lies. This is a daughter's revenge, a fantasy," he roared. Zane was pale, frozen, just staring at the cover of the report. The room was descending into chaos. And then the door opened. Colonel Miller stepped inside. He was in his full-class uniform, his presence instantly commanding the room to silence. He gave a sharp nod to the 3 officers at the table. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Apologies for the interruption. My name is Colonel Miller, NATO Counterintelligence. This tribunal is now a matter of national security." He walked to the table, placed his briefcase on it, and clicked it open. He looked at my uncle. "Mr. Al-Hassan, you filed a complaint against a former decorated analyst. My investigation, however, concerns your son." He then turned his gaze to Zane. A gaze that could freeze fire. "We have a decrypted briefing tape you might find illuminating." He pulled out a small digital audio player, and he pressed play. There's that moment in stories, the hero entrance, the cavalry arriving over the hill. Who in your life has shown up at the exact right moment to save the day? Zane's voice filled the room. The nervous, bragging voice from the sting. "I have access to everything. My cousin, she was a legend. I can get you anything you need." The voice of the undercover agent, calm and professional. "Can you prove it?" I remembered meeting Miller for the first time. His one piece of advice to me: facts first, always. It was his ethos. And it was the ethos that was now saving my life. I watched my uncle's face crumble as the tape played. The performance was over. The bravado, the anger, it all just dissolved. He slumped into his chair, a broken man. I looked at Zane. His eyes were wide with sheer animal panic. He looked from the audio player to Miller to the door, and then he ran. He actually bolted from his chair and tried to run for the door, but 2 military policemen, who had been standing silently outside, stepped into the doorway, blocking his path. It was over. The whole thing. As Zane's pathetic attempt to sell fake intelligence echoed in the dead silent room, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound, tectonic shift inside me. The weight I had been carrying my entire life, the weight of being the responsible one, the one who had to be perfect to make up for their flaws, it was just gone. In the end, it wasn't my voice that condemned them. It was their own. The tape stopped. The last echo of my cousin's desperate voice vanished, and the silence that flooded the room was heavier, more absolute than anything I have ever experienced. It was the sound of a world ending. Zane, his face slick with sweat, scrambled from his chair. His pathetic attempt to flee was less a sprint for freedom and more the terrified scuttling of a cornered animal. The 2 military policemen at the door simply stepped forward, blocking his path without a word. He just stopped, trembling, his escape lasting all of 3 feet. I looked at my uncle. The performer was gone. The roaring patriarch, the charismatic community leader, the man who had commanded that room with such righteous fury just minutes before, he was gone. What was left was a shrunken, hollowed-out old man, staring at the polished wood of the table as if it held the secrets to the universe. He didn't look at me. I don't think he was capable of looking at anyone. He had crumbled into himself. My gaze drifted to the gallery. To my Aunt Sadia. She was weeping, but her tears weren't for me. They weren't tears of regret or remorse for what she had done. They were tears for the life that had just been dynamited, for the son who was now in custody, for the husband who was now a broken shell, for the comfortable protected world her money and her silence had built, now lying in smoking ruins around her. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no joy, no desire to say, "I told you so." Just a vast, quiet, hollow space where a family used to be. The victory didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a successful amputation. The limb was gangrenous, and removing it was the only way to ensure survival. But there is still the phantom pain of what was once there. A dull ache that reminds you of the loss. I didn't win. I survived. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, cut through the silence. Me, maybe 7 years old, after falling off my bike. My knee was a bloody mess of gravel and tears. My uncle had rushed over, cleaned the wound with a gentleness that seemed impossible for his large hands, and bandaged it carefully. "We take care of our own," he had told me, his voice soft. That memory, once a source of comfort, now felt like a shard of glass working its way through my heart. I stood up. I gave a slight, formal nod to Colonel Miller. An acknowledgement, a thank you. Then I turned, and I walked out of that room, and I did not look back. After a huge life event like that, you'd think there would be noise, celebration, anger, something, but there's often just a strange, profound quiet. Have you ever felt that? That feeling of, what now? The silence after the storm. A few days later, my lawyer called. He told me my aunt, in a desperate bid for leniency, had given a full and complete confession to the FBI. She corroborated every single detail in my dossier. And then she gave them more. Details about the Atlas Logistics conspiracy, about my uncle's knowing financial involvement that even I hadn't uncovered. She implicated both her husband and her son to a degree that was stunning in its totality. In the end, the silent chairman of the board finally spoke, and she did it to save herself, by selling out the very people she had ruined me to protect. It was the last, most perfect act of betrayal in a story full of them. Months have passed now. Zane and my uncle are facing a raft of federal charges: wire fraud, conspiracy to make false statements to federal officers. The legal machinery grinds slowly, but it grinds fine. Their trials will be quiet, procedural affairs, their guilt already a matter of record. The family, as I knew it, is gone. It was a fiction all along, and the story has finally ended. I don't live in that city anymore. I moved. I have a new apartment, a new phone number. I've blocked every single one of them. Every email address, every social media profile, I have methodically and digitally erased them from my life. It's a firewall I should have built years ago. 2 months ago, Colonel Miller called me. He didn't ask, he just stated. There was a permanent position for a civilian analyst in his counterintelligence task force. My skills, he said, were a proven asset. I accepted. Now I sit at a new desk in a new city. My work is the same. I find the truth in a sea of data. I connect the dots. I follow the money. But I'm no longer doing it to earn the approval of people who saw me as a disposable pawn. I am doing it for a mission I believe in. And I am doing it for myself. I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's not about who you share a dinner table with. Family is about who shows up with the decrypted tape when the walls are closing in. Family is about who trusts your facts and honors your truth. For my entire life, I was their responsible one, their workhorse, their safety net, and ultimately, their scapegoat. Now, the books are balanced. The ledger is clear. I owe them nothing. I am my own asset. On my desk, I keep my old NATO ID badge. The photo is of a younger woman, her eyes brighter, more eager, a little more naive. I don't feel sorry for her. I feel proud of her. She was the one who gathered the skills. She put in the hours. She did the work. I just finally learned how to use those skills as weapons to defend myself. They tried to erase my name, but in the end, the only thing they did was give me a new one to write for myself. The final discovery, I guess, has been an internal one. For a long time, I thought I would need an apology to be able to move on. But I've come to realize that I don't. I'm not waiting for one. I don't need their remorse. Their silence is my peace. Their absence is my freedom. My security clearance has been fully restored. My reputation, the one they tried so hard to shatter, is more solid than ever. The case is closed. This was my story. My testimony. From erasure to prosecution. Thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, comment with a single word that describes how you feel right now. I'll read every one.